You've probably run the numbers, maybe more than once, maybe 100 times actually, on a legal pad at the kitchen table at midnight in a spreadsheet you've tweaked until the cells blurred, or in one of those online calculators that spits out a verdict in 3 seconds and somehow still leaves you feeling unsettled. You've done the math, and yet here you are, still asking the question, am I ready? I want to tell you something today that might shift the entire way you've been thinking about this, because after years of sitting across from real people, people who've worked hard, sacrificed plenty, and built something meaningful, I've come to believe that the perfect retirement age has very little to do with the numbers on that spreadsheet and almost everything to do with something most financial conversations completely ignore. But we'll get there. First, let's talk about what the data actually says. Because before we get personal, before we get honest, it helps to zoom out and look at what thousands of real retirees have experienced. And some of what the research reveals will genuinely surprise you. Here's something the retirement industry doesn't advertise loudly enough. Almost half of all retirees never actually chose their retirement date. Let that land for a moment. Research shows that over 48% of retirees stepped away from work earlier than they had planned. Not because they hit their magic number, not because they sat down one Tuesday, reviewed their portfolio, and decided the stars had aligned. They left because life made the decision for them. A layoff, a health scare, caregiver responsibilities that quietly swallowed their schedule whole. Burnout that crept up so gradually they didn't even recognize it until one morning they simply couldn't walk back through that door. And then there's a group that surprises people even more. Those who could have retired earlier but had no idea they were already financially ready. They were sitting on enough. They just didn't know it. On the other end, only about 10% of retirees in this research ended up working longer than they'd originally planned. Read that again, only 10%. That means the overwhelming probability, statistically, mathematically, if we're being honest, is that you will not retire when you plan to. You'll retire sooner, either because something forces your hand or because the moment arrives and you finally have the wisdom or the courage to say yes to it. This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake you up. Because if nearly half of us don't get to choose our exit date, then the single most powerful thing you can do right now, whatever your age, whatever your balance, is to prepare as if that moment could come at any time. I always tell people, plan like you'll pick your retirement date, but prepare like you won't. That one shift in thinking has changed everything for so many people I've worked with. Let me tell you what caught my eye in the research. When thousands of Americans were surveyed about what they believed to be the best age to retire, the sweet spot, the ideal intersection of financial readiness and quality of life, the number that emerged wasn't 65. It wasn't the Medicare milestone or the Social Security full retirement age most people anchor their planning to. It was 63. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's only 2 years earlier than 65. Why does that matter? But here's why age 63 makes not just statistical sense, but deeply human sense. At 63, three things are still working powerfully in your favor. And this combination is rarer than most people realize. First, your health window is still wide open. Most people at 63 are still mobile, still energetic, still capable of doing the things they've spent their whole career dreaming about. The road trip, the extended travel, the hiking trail they bookmarked 15 years ago, the grandchildren they want to chase around a backyard without running out of breath. Health is not a guaranteed resource. It is a depreciating one. And at 63, most people still have a lot of it left. Second, the compounding has already done extraordinary work. By your early 60s, if you've been investing consistently, you've had decades of growth stacking on itself. The heavy lifting has been done. The portfolio has matured. You're not starting from scratch. You're harvesting what patient, disciplined, long-term investing built. Third, the Medicare gap is manageable. At 63, you're roughly 2 years from Medicare eligibility at 65. That's a bridge, not an ocean. With the right planning, That gap is navigable without gutting your savings or sacrificing the coverage you need. But here's the part that nobody wants to say out loud at financial conferences. By your late 60s, the health window starts closing. Not dramatically, not all at once, but it closes, quietly, gradually. And the cruel irony of working those extra years is that the body you delayed retirement to protect financially is the same body that starts asking for more rest, more grace, more time. The very asset you were trying to maximize, your freedom to live, begins to cost more to maintain. Could delaying retirement hypothetically add hundreds of thousands of dollars to your portfolio? Absolutely. That math is real. But here's the question nobody's calculator can answer for you. If you already have enough and you trade 3 of your best, healthiest, most energetic years for a larger balance you may never fully spend, was that actually a win? That's not a financial question. That's a life question. The break-even point nobody talks about. Every financial planner worth their license will show you a break-even analysis for Social Security. Take it early, here's your break-even. Delay it to 70, here's when the bigger check catches up. It's a useful framework. But there's another break-even point that matters far more, and almost no one ever calculates it. I call it the emotional and physical break-even. It's the moment specific to you, to your health, to your relationships, to what fires you up in the morning, where the payoff of retiring now outweighs the financial boost of staying longer. It's not a number, it's a feeling that comes with clarity behind it. It's the moment where your freedom, your health, and your finances finally align. And when those 3 things align, you stop asking, can I afford to retire? And you start asking a much more interesting question. Do I even want to wait any longer? That question, do I want to wait, is the one that changes everything. Because for many people, especially those who've planned thoughtfully, the honest answer is no. You don't want to wait. You've earned this. You've paid for this with decades of early mornings and long meetings and postponed vacations. And I'll do that when I retire promises to yourself. The break-even point is when honoring those promises becomes more valuable than the returns on the delay. What retirees wish they had done differently. I want to share something that stopped me in my tracks when I first read it. A study from the Trans-America Center for Retirement Studies asked retirees to reflect honestly on their biggest regrets, and the results were illuminating and, in some cases, heartbreaking. About 76% of retirees said they wish they had saved more. That's the expected answer. We all know we could have saved more. We made choices along the way, and most of us would make at least a few of them differently in hindsight. About 23% said they regretted claiming Social Security too early, though that also means 77% felt fine or good about when they claimed. Timing Social Security is deeply personal, and there's rarely a universal right answer. But here's the finding that stays with me. Nearly half of retirees who delayed retirement said they wished they had retired 4 years earlier. 4 years. That's not a rounding error. That's not a minor miscalculation. 4 years of additional income, additional meetings, additional Monday mornings, additional sacrificed weekends. And when they finally stepped away, they didn't celebrate the extra security they'd built. They mourned the time they'd left on the table. They didn't need the money. They needed the time. And that distinction between needing more money and needing more time is the most important distinction in all of retirement planning, because the two are not the same. They feel like the same thing for decades while you're building, while you're accumulating, while you're adding another zero to the balance. But in retirement, they split apart completely. Money and time are not interchangeable. Time runs in one direction only. But what about the fear? Let's be honest about the fears, because they're real. Dismissing them doesn't serve you. What if I get bored? What if I lose my sense of purpose? What if my identity is so tied to what I do for a living that I don't know who I am without it? What if my health declines now that I'm not mentally stimulated every day? What if my marriage changes? We've spent 35 years operating on separate schedules, and now suddenly we're both home all day, every day. What if I feel useless? What if I lose the respect I've spent a lifetime earning? These are not small fears. These are the fears that keep intelligent, accomplished, financially ready people sitting at their desks for years longer than they need to be. I've seen it more times than I can count. Smart, capable, financially secure people, people who have genuinely done the work, built the plan, and could walk out the door tomorrow, who are still sitting in meetings they don't need to attend, managing projects they could hand off tomorrow because the identity and the income have become the same thing in their minds, and separating them feels like losing something essential about themselves. That fear is worth naming. It's also worth gently challenging. Because what I've seen again and again in conversation after conversation with people who've made the transition is that the identity doesn't disappear when the career does. It transforms. The discipline and drive and intellectual curiosity and leadership that made you exceptional at your work don't vanish on your last day. They go looking for a new home. And often they find one that fits even better. The woman who spent 30 years running operations for a mid-sized company becomes the most organized, most committed volunteer in her community's food bank. The engineer who built infrastructure for a technology firm starts building raised garden beds and teaching neighborhood kids how seeds become food. The financial executive who managed millions in assets starts mentoring young adults in his church who have never had anyone sit down and explain how money actually works. The skills don't retire. They just get redeployed somewhere that feels more personal, more chosen, more you. But here's what the research says, and I want you to really receive this, not just file it away as another statistic. In the same body of research, 82% of retirees reported feeling more relaxed after retiring. 75% said their stress levels dropped significantly. And 67%, 2 out of 3 people, said they were genuinely happier in retirement than they ever were while working. Those aren't small numbers. Those are overwhelming majorities. And they're not coming from people who had unlimited wealth or perfectly smooth transitions. They're coming from everyday people who made the leap, felt the fear, and discovered something on the other side that surprised them. And there's actual science behind this. Researchers who tracked life satisfaction across decades found something called the U-curve of happiness. Here's how it works. Life satisfaction tends to be relatively high when we're young, before the weight of career pressure and adult responsibility fully sets in. Then, through our 30s, 40s, and into our 50s, satisfaction dips. Career stress, financial pressure, competing demands, the relentless performance of adult life, showing up, producing, proving, advancing, maintaining. But then something shifts. As people move toward and through retirement age, satisfaction rises again, meaningfully. Not because life becomes easier, it doesn't, but because people finally reclaim ownership of their time. They move at their own pace. They make choices based on what matters to them, not what matters to an organization or a quarterly target or a performance review. They've accumulated the experience, the relationships, and in many cases, the hard-won wisdom to know what a genuinely good day actually looks and feels like. The U-curve bottoms out somewhere in your early to mid-50s for most people, and it climbs back up. If you're in that dip right now, if you're grinding through a phase of life that feels more exhausting than fulfilling, that's not a permanent condition. That's the arc of a human life. And retirement, done right, is the beginning of the ascent back toward the joy and freedom and lightness you remember from earlier, simpler days. Except this time, you bring everything you've learned with you. The 3 questions that actually matter. So what does all of this mean for you specifically? Because data is useful, but data doesn't know your name. It doesn't know how your knees feel in the morning, or how much you love what you do, or whether you're dreading retirement or counting down the days. Over years of conversations with people at every stage of retirement planning, I've landed on 3 questions that cut through the noise faster than any spreadsheet. 3 questions that help you get honest with yourself about where you actually are. I think of them as a scorecard. Score yourself 1 to 10 on each, and the total tells you something true. Question 1. How is your health? Not how old you are. Not what your doctor said at your last physical. How do you feel? How capable do you feel, right now, today, of living the retirement you've imagined? Think about the life you've been picturing, the travel, the mornings without an alarm, the grandchildren, the hiking, the gardening, the long lunches with old friends, the road you've been meaning to drive since the 1990s. Do you have the body, the energy, the stamina to support that vision? Give yourself a score. Be honest. If you're thriving physically, that's a 10. If you're managing some limitations but still doing well, maybe a 7 or 8. If health is a genuine concern that clouds your vision of retirement, score accordingly. This is not about being harsh with yourself. It's about being honest, because your health is not just a factor in retirement planning. It's the whole point. You're not planning for a number. You're planning for a life, and your body is how you get to live it. Question 2, how are your finances? Not just the balance, not just the portfolio total that you check on your phone before you get out of bed. How confident are you, genuinely in your gut, not just in a spreadsheet, that your income, your savings, your tax strategy, and your Social Security plan can carry you and the people you love for the next 30 plus years? Have you stress tested the plan? Have you thought about inflation, about healthcare costs, about sequence of returns risk in those first 5 years of retirement? Have you thought about what happens if the market drops 30% in year 2 of retirement and you're drawing down simultaneously? These are not reasons to panic. They are reasons to plan. And planning is precisely what allows you to arrive at a confident score on this question. If you've done the deep work, run the scenarios, consulted people who know what they're doing, and you genuinely trust the plan, score yourself high. If you haven't done that work yet, or if you've done it but still feel uneasy, the work isn't finished. A lower score here isn't failure. It's useful information. Question 3, what is your purpose? This is the one that trips people up the most, and I think it's the question that matters most. Not what are you going to do in retirement in a vague someday sense, not travel or relax or spend time with family. Those are categories, not a life. What does a genuinely great day look like for you in retirement? Not a vacation day, a regular Tuesday. What does that look like from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.? If you can answer that question with specificity and excitement, you're ready in a way that no balance sheet can measure. If the answer feels hollow or uncertain, if "I'll figure it out" is the honest response, that's the most important thing to work on before you retire. Not the portfolio, not the tax strategy, the purpose. Because the retirees who struggle are almost never the ones who ran out of money. They're the ones who ran out of reason to get out of bed. Purpose is not something retirement gives you. It's something you bring to it. The good news is that it can be built deliberately, intentionally, with real thought and real conversation, usually with the people you love most, who will share this chapter with you. What your score means. Add up your 3 scores, and here's what it tells you. If you find yourself in that 24 to 30 range, you may already be standing in your retirement window. And if that's the case, the most important question isn't, am I ready? It's what's actually holding me back. Often it's not a financial problem. It's a psychological one. The identity wrapped up in the career, the fear of the unknown, the habit of striving that doesn't know how to become the habit of living. These are real and they deserve real attention, but they're not reasons to delay. They're invitations to grow. If you're in the 18 to 23 range, you're likely close, with 1 or 2 areas that need more clarity or more work. In my experience, the gap is almost always purpose or confidence. Either someone hasn't envisioned retirement vividly enough to feel excited about it, or they've done the planning but still feel like they need someone to look them in the eye and say, yes, you've done the work, you're ready. Sometimes the most valuable thing in retirement planning isn't a calculation. It's a second opinion from someone who's seen a lot of plans and can tell you honestly where you stand. If you're below 18, that's not bad news. That's useful news. It means there's a gap between where you are and where you want to be. And now you know where to put your energy. The question stops being abstract and becomes concrete. Which of these three areas needs the most attention? What's the one thing you could do in the next 3 months to move your score up? Start there. There's one more thing I want to address before we land this plane, and it's something that doesn't show up in most retirement articles because it's uncomfortable and the financial industry tends to stay in its lane. The retirement decision is rarely made alone. For those of you who are married or partnered, for those of you who have built this life alongside someone else, the question of when to retire is also a question of when we retire. And that conversation, the honest one, is one that many couples postpone far longer than they should. I've sat with couples who each had a completely different picture of what retirement looked like. He was imagining cross-country road trips, sleeping late, taking up woodworking. She was imagining staying involved in her consulting work part-time, keeping a schedule, maintaining her professional network. They'd been married 38 years and somehow never compared notes on the actual vision. That's not unusual. In fact, it's more common than you'd think, because during the working years, the shared goal is clear: build, save, raise the family, keep the ship moving forward. The what for gets deferred. And then suddenly you're staring down the runway of retirement and realizing you've been flying toward the same destination with two very different ideas of what it looks like on the ground. The 3-question scorecard I mentioned earlier is even more powerful when you do it separately, you and your partner independently, then compare. Not to debate each other's answers, but to understand them, to learn something, to start the real conversation. Because here's what I've found: when couples are misaligned on retirement, when one person is ready and the other isn't, when one wants to travel and the other wants to stay rooted, when one wants to work part-time and the other wants a clean break, the gap is almost never about the money. It's about the vision. And the vision can be negotiated. It can be blended. It can be built together, deliberately, with care. But only if you start the conversation before one of you is already resentful for waiting too long or frightened by moving too fast. The best retirement plans I've ever seen aren't the ones with the largest portfolios. They're the ones where two people sat down, maybe over coffee, maybe at the kitchen table, maybe on a long drive where the conversation could breathe, and got honest with each other about what they want this next chapter to look like, what excites them, what scares them, what they're willing to trade, and what they're not. If you haven't had that conversation yet, consider this your invitation, not a financial conversation, a life conversation, one of the most important ones you'll ever have. I want to add one more layer before we close, because I think it matters enormously and it gets overlooked in almost every retirement discussion I've ever heard. Preparing for retirement is not just a financial act, it's an act of love. When you do the planning now, when you get your estate documents in order, when you think carefully about healthcare contingencies, when you have the honest conversation with your spouse about what you both want, when you define your purpose before you need it, you are giving a gift to the people you love most. You're giving them clarity instead of chaos. You're giving them direction instead of difficult guesses. You're giving them the gift of not having to make impossible decisions in impossible moments because you were thoughtful enough to make those decisions in advance from a place of calm and intention rather than crisis. I've seen what happens when families face the retirement transition without a plan. It's hard. It creates conflict where there didn't have to be any. And the people who bear that weight, the adult children, the spouses, the siblings who step in to piece things together, they carry it for years. And I've seen what happens when families face the same transition with a plan in place. It's not perfect. Nothing is. But it's grounded. It's loving. It's the difference between a gift given with intention and a burden left behind without one. You're not just planning for yourself. You're planning for everyone who loves you and will be affected by the decisions you make or fail to make about this next chapter. Do it for you, but do it for them too. Here's what I want to leave you with, and it's something I've said to clients in the quiet of a conversation when the spreadsheets are closed and the formulas don't apply. The question isn't, what's the perfect age to retire? The question is, what kind of life am I ready to live? Because when you can answer that, when you can paint that picture with enough color and specificity that it feels real, feels achievable, feels like something worth stepping toward, the age takes care of itself. The timing becomes obvious. The fear doesn't disappear, but it shrinks to something manageable, something worth moving through. Retirement isn't a finish line, it's a starting line. It's the beginning of the chapter you've been building toward your entire adult life. Every sacrifice, every contribution, every long drive home from a job that asked a lot of you, every Sunday evening when you thought there has to be more than this. There is more. And the research, the data, the lived experience of thousands of real people who've made this leap, it all points to the same truth. For most people who've done the work, retirement brings more peace, more freedom, more joy, and more authentic living than the working years ever could. The only real question is whether you'll be ready to say yes when the moment arrives, whether you'll have built enough margin, financially, emotionally, purposefully, to recognize the window and walk through it, because that window opens for everyone. The difference between people who seize it and people who miss it isn't intelligence, and it isn't income. It's preparation. It's intentionality. It's the willingness to start asking the hard questions before you have to, while you still have the luxury of time to answer them thoughtfully. You may already be much closer to retirement than you believe, not because the numbers are perfect, they rarely are, but because the gap between where you are and where you need to be might be smaller than the fear makes it look. The people I've seen thrive in retirement aren't the ones who waited until every variable was optimized. They're the ones who got honest with themselves, did the real planning, found their purpose, and made the leap with their eyes open. They'll tell you, without exception, that the only thing they wish they'd done differently was start the conversation sooner. So start it now, with yourself, with your spouse, with someone who knows what they're doing and can look at your whole picture, not just the numbers, but the life you're actually trying to build. Because the perfect retirement age isn't written in a formula. It's written in the answer to a much more personal question. And you might already know the answer. You just might need someone to help you trust it.